So Victoria Manganiello is an American artist, designer, educator, and organizer working primarily with textiles. And I guess that's what brought you here. So her recent projects explore themes in women's work, also technology and food. And I guess this is also something you are working now in the residency, and we will hear from you shortly. So she has received multiple internationally recognized grants, commissions, and residency appointments. And she has also exhibited her work internationally across Europe, in Taiwan, and throughout the United States. She's also a part-time professor at New York University and Parsons School of Design. So in her work, Victoria uses the haptic quality of cloth and the history of craft and women's work to explore themes in ritual, in gender, in technology. So I guess these three topics will play also a quite big role in your current project, and we're happy to look a bit more closely into what you're doing here.
Great.
Thank you, Victoria.
Thank you. And can you all hear me easily? So just quick thank you for the introduction. Thank you, TaDA, Marianne, and Martina, to my studio mates and roommates, Otto, Nelly, and Michaela. It's been a real fruitful, exciting, and creative 3 months together with you all. So thank you for having me. So as you just learned, I'm doing lots of different things, but I'd say that everything that I do has some sort of connection to textile. Of course, that's what brought me here. I'm primarily a weaver, but I'm also a very firm believer that textiles are systems and they connect to so many other things. So you'll see, I'll start by sharing some of my past projects before I get into what I've been doing here. And you'll see that I'm exploring lots of different materials and mediums and formats, always though connected back to textile. I can also try to speak louder. This is better? Okay. Should I repeat that? I'll just go. So like I mentioned, I'm primarily a weaver, but I also work with some other textile-related techniques. So the loom that I primarily work with at home is a jack loom. I'm also a natural and synthetic dyer. I work with machine knitting, and I'm an amateur physical computing upcoming nerd. I've been playing a lot with things like Arduino and JavaScript. The materials I work with also have a large range, so yarns I'm using very natural materials, including yarn that I'm spinning myself from wool or silk, all the way to very highly synthetic yarns. I work with fiber optics and hope to continue working with them through a new conversation recently started here with EMPA, and conductive thread and a few other experimental materials. And then, of course, I'm also working with food, as has been mentioned, and you'll see at my intermezzo later that there's more connection to food. I've been spinning seeds into some of my yarn and trying to make textiles that you can sort of bury and become part of the landscape, and then sewable electronics. I work primarily, though, as an artist, so I'm making these large-scale pieces that I call woven paintings. And just for the sake of time, I'll kind of scroll through them more quickly. I tend to work big, and depending on the size of the studio or the exhibition space, I love to go as big as possible. Sometimes the textile even finds its way onto the floor or ceiling. I make large-scale installations that hang from the ceiling, and here you can see that these panels have the three that hang from the ceiling have a fourth that intersects them. And so I'm using complex weaving structures in double and triple cloth in order to integrate those. Here's another installation of that type. So again, these things are made by traditional techniques in weaving, and I'm using very handmade and slow technologies. It wasn't until I arrived here that I started exploring what's possible with the jacquard. So just to switch materials, so to speak, for a moment, I'm also making some documentary films about textile. I'm especially interested in the way that textile functions, again, in the system of our society. It's both the past and the future, and the people that have been responsible for stewarding these materials throughout history and into the technology spaces have frequently been left out of those narratives. So the two documentaries that I'm sort of working on simultaneously are exploring the people, mainly the women, who have been a part of textiles innovation. I've been working with technology in different ways. You can see this GIF describes this installation and the way it moves. So it's woven by hand with a hollow polymer tubing, and the liquid that moves through it is a fiber reactive dye, a water-based dye. And so I'm using a small little computer and a little Arduino microcontroller so that the liquid that moves through the textile has an intentional pattern. This project is weaving with fiber optics, and it's connected to, in the exhibition space, we're in the same shirt. You can see there's a microphone, and you can go in and share a message, and the sentiment analysis in the microcontroller translates the thing that you've said into a color. So it's pretty simple code at this point. It's either negative, neutral, or positive, and those have 3 colors, so that fiber optics in the material take on the average of the sentiment that's been communicated. And then I'm also working on a cookbook, so I have a little preview on my table in the back, and I'm excited to be showing the cookbook at the Volumes Book Fair this weekend in Zurich. If anyone is there, please come say hi. So anyway, that was a quick overview of some of my past and ongoing projects. But during my time here, I've had the pleasure to work with lots of firms. Some I've had the chance to work with in more depth, but everyone has been so generous with their time, with their materials, and with their space. I want to talk mostly about 2 particular collaborations, and first I'll start with TaDA. So I had this idea I mentioned before that I've been weaving with seeds and interested in growing my textiles. So here are some early sketches and prototypes. I wanted to make these objects that I called woven vessels. So here are a couple of first prototypes. You can see the loom there at TaDA with us weaving them. Here I brought them with me to sitter work to hang so I could see them on a large scale. And then you can see the prototypes in the back. So what's happening here is I'm weaving multiple layers of cloth simultaneously to create an interior space. And I hope to eventually use those yarns that I've spun seeds into so that these materials can actually be embedded into the landscape and we could grow something from them. But the experiments have not finished. I haven't resolved it quite yet. I think I did 5 or 6 or 8 different trials over at TaDA. And I hope to continue working with them to sort of figure out the shape that's going to make this work. And then I was also exploring something called cellular autonoma, which is a way that I've been learning JavaScript. And so I've been translating this programming, this computer programming that I've been learning into weaving patterns. So you can sort of see that here. And again, I have a sample from one of these in the back. And in this project, I've been working with Rigotex, who's been helping me to realize these into physical textiles. I'm also spending a lot of time in our studio in Arbonne and playing around with soft electronics. And at my intermezzo, I'll do a couple of demonstrations of some of those. But I feel like it's important for me to say that I'm a total amateur with this stuff, or rather I'm learning as I go. So I have a thing I want to make, a material I want to activate, and I sort of reverse engineer for myself. I'm not trained as an electrical engineer at all, but this has been a great way for me to learn about it. And I often think that if I had been taught how to sew a circuit into a textile in my physics class or in my science classes, maybe I would have become a scientist. This is the language and this is the material that makes sense to me, but when we learn stuff in only one way, it limits what becomes possible from those students. And then just a quick few images here. I played around with some thermochromic pigment over at Textile Ducray, and I have some samples of that as well. So this is a material that's going to change color depending on the heat that touches it. So I suppose our discussion might touch at some of these next steps, but I wanted to first just mention that Being here was really a beginning. I feel like I finished nothing because I started everything, so to speak. I came up with so many new projects, I made so many new tests, and I have found in my experience with residencies that the most fruitful aspect comes after you leave. And I'm very excited to stay in touch with everyone that I've had the chance to work with here. And you can stay in touch with me on my links.
Okay, thank you so much. So this was a dense insight in your different endeavors you're taking on in this residency. Just one quick question. These woven vessels with multiple layers forming a space, are there seeds integrated in them?
I hope to eventually integrate the seeds. I have some of the tests over in the back, so please feel free to go and take a look, and I tried to pin them so that you can understand that there are layers. But for now, I'm trying to figure out the woven structures and patterns. Once this is resolved, I'll bring my yarn that has the seeds into the production.
So the vessels forming an inner space, but also your artistic work you just showed us, like these more space-relevant these installations you have made. How come that you go from a textile, which in my notion is always a bit, or tends a bit to be a flat piece of cloth, into space? What brings you from textile to space?
The first thing that comes to my mind in answering that question is the connection between architecture and textile. Of course, our first structures were tense, and so I'm not sure why, but for me, they're dimensional by nature. One of my favorite readings by our beloved goddess Annie Albers, she talks a lot about the relationship between architects and weavers and how it's somehow our societal expectations of gender that bring women towards weaving and men towards architecture, but those who go to those two paths have similar brain.
Yeah.
So maybe this is what has happened to me, and when I was a kid I wanted to be an architect too.
Okay. So this relation between weaving and architecture is also interesting, because architecture and weaving are very old, very traditional techniques, and loaded with this gender aspect, as you just mentioned. So what interests me is that you also connect weaving as a very old technique with computing. Maybe you could expand that a little bit, because there are also historical reasons why this connection is so close.
I could talk for hours on this topic, but I won't. I think that we have, of course, there's this history. You can look at examples from our past that demonstrate to us the ways that data and information has been embedded into textile. So just a few quick examples. The ancient Incans used something called a quipu to record records, and they had a complex system of knots. This is many thousands of years ago. The women who created the computers that got the Apollo to space were weaving those microcontrollers. So we've seen the woven structure be a part of this. But I'll be a bit more narrow for a moment to talk about what inspires me, which is the materiality of it. So we live in this, technology world where everything is plastic or metal, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. Like the example I love to use is, what if the light switch was made of velvet and you turn the light off by stroking a piece of velvet? I think everyone would be probably a little more calm.
So more haptic experiencing.
I'm interested in that. Why has technology become so hard?
Yeah.
And I mentioned I'm an amateur coder. You look at coding language and it's all very warlike. We execute commands. Why can't it be we thread needles? It's all arbitrary if you really think about it. These metaphors that we use to describe our technology come from a masculine space, but they don't have to. And I believe that if we make things softer, that we can actually change the bigger systems.
So these questions, they pertain to the conceptual phase also, but also to the production, how we produce textiles, and weaving and computing do have a connection there. But what does interest me, maybe I'm wrong, but I think why is wearables not so much a question nowadays? So there was this big hope that we can wear computing in our clothes and everywhere, or just you mentioned just the switch. We could just switch off in a different way, but I don't see projects. Am I wrong, or?
I don't think you're wrong. In my research, I find that as well. It seems that innovation is accelerating at very similar rates in almost every industry except textiles and fashion. I don't know why that is, but maybe it's the responsibility of the TaDA residents to change that. I know that I'd love to be a part of changing that, but the tools I normally have access to, I guess this is about to be my TaDA plug, the tools I have access to normally are not those that are more high-tech. So being able to come here and just walk into EMPA and say, hey, I've got this crazy idea, and they're like, okay.
Exactly.
What a privilege
Yeah.
this is, and I think we learned this from this morning's talks, how essential it is to have a design-minded person just next to a science-minded person. Nothing happens alone, right? I think this is something I've come to embrace with time, this like hero narrative that the artist sits alone in their studio and invents the future. Collaboration is really the only way.
So it's all about cross-pollination, like your artistic ideas with people from the technology, and then something new, a new story starts. But if you look back at the time you now have spent at TaDA, you just gave us quite a good impression how you delve into the different possibilities. But what do you think? What do you bring with you in the next few months? What are you heading to with this experience?
Yeah, I think the idea of what machines can do for me has changed. My looms at home are analog, they're not the Jacquard digital ones, and now that I've had the chance to really spend 3 months at TaDA, going in at least once a week and experimenting there, I feel more equipped to continue. But I don't know, I think it's a little bit more meta than that somehow, like this embracing the technicalities of collaboration. I've always been really interested in sharing information and being open source with it, and I think I can be an ambassador for that in a way that a company might not be able to. And we had emailed about this, the idea that a company has their proprietary information, they have to protect it, of course, this is how they make money, but when this knowledge belongs to all of us to a certain extent, someone like me as an educator, as an organizer, perhaps I can bring what I've learned to the people I meet.
Yeah, exactly. That just brings me to the next question. Will this affect also your teaching in a way?
Yeah, don't you think the university should have paid me to come here? I'm going to bring so much back to them. Yeah, it absolutely will. I'm very excited to share what I've learned with my students. I think of myself as I wear many hats, but educator seems to be the most core for me. I love teaching, and I think the secret to teaching is you're really a student for life. You just get to decide what the readings are.
Yes, always curious about also new techniques, combining Arduino with weaving, which is quite interesting. Do you have any references there? Are there other people doing that, or are you talking to colleagues about that?
Yeah, so many people are doing it, and I'm certainly not the first and hopefully not the last. There's a whole kind of niche community, we call ourselves e-textiles, and maybe that's a word that's familiar, but there's a lot of people going really deep into it. I actually co-organize a residency called e-textiles, and so if anyone wants to attend that, you can find more information on my website, but it's a niche group of people who are interested in exploring this, and being a part of this legacy, which we mentioned earlier, is quite historical.
Did you also reflect anew about this, about the process leading you from ideation towards prototyping, towards step-by-step working on this idea together with people from the different companies? Is it all the same process if you do it with more arts and crafts techniques?
Well, I actually applied to TaDA with a project that I never realized here. I do have a prototype of it in the back, but it's sort of a funny coincidence that I didn't get to work on it because instead I worked on all these other things. But every factory tour we went on, it's like, okay, here's 15 ideas I have for Filtex, or it's just, there are so many possibilities, and in 3 months.
Yeah, too many candies in the store.
Yeah, there's so much potential. So 3 months is both a lot and very little at the same time.
Yeah, okay. So, thank you so much for these insights. If you have any questions, feel free to just ask Victoria, or take the chance to have a deeper... Yes, please.
Very detailed question. What kind of yarn did you use for your bases?
I've so far used the Polly's yarns over at TaDA. I would like to experiment with these wool and linens that have the seeds so that they could actually eventually disappear into the landscape. But for now it's poly. And it's funny because I thought it should be natural because it has to sink into the landscape, but now that the prototypes are made out of polyester, maybe they don't disappear, but instead they become sort of like a soft ceramic and they live in the house. So again, the wisdom of iteration, okay, let's start with this one variable, this fiber, and then we focus on shape. But coincidentally, we learned so much from that. And I made the, I don't know if this will take me too many slides. I made this piece as a, just a series of a bunch of vessels, all different shapes. But then I was like, oh man, that's a curtain. I love it. It just does like a textile on its own. So I wouldn't have, if I knew I was making a curtain, I wouldn't have found this, but because I sort of accidentally hung it up to take a photo, I think I'm going to make some curtains now. So.
Okay. So these are the happy chances to take, but you have to, yes, grab them also.
Yeah.
So to see what is leading you towards another project or another idea. Okay. Any, yes, oh, questions coming? Yes, please.
Victoria,
The microphone.
I thought already
Microphone. Sorry.
Victoria, I think already in the beginning there was this idea to combine textile with seeds. Yes? Because you said your original project, you didn't even start with it here because you had so many other ideas.
Yeah, the project I proposed in my application was one that I didn't work on, but the prototypes I've made with the seeds was one I was working on previously. I think I had an image before.
Yeah.
I'm a big prototyper, and I also, you know, artists are, it's hard to find funding, so sometimes I'll make a prototype, I'll get some photos for it, and it might be 2 or 3 residency applications later before someone's interested in supporting it, so I try to keep them in my back pocket.
Okay, so prototypes are deeply discursive objects. You can make the future tangible with that, which is always interesting. Okay, looking at, well, there is a last question, short one, maybe.
That would be seeds for you. Are they data points? Because a lot of your work on the textile becomes data points and hence technology, and hence soft technology and maybe non-mass technology in a way. So I'm wondering, how does seed and data point work for you as technology in the textile space?
I love that question. I haven't made that connection into a material yet. I love that question. I haven't made that idea into a material yet. But maybe that comes soon, and I don't know enough yet about coding and electronics and botany to combine them, but I love the idea that you could time the seeds with the cycle of the season and have that be a pressure sensor that activates something else. For me, this is something for the future, so I'll have to give you credit for the idea.
Thank you. Another cross-pollination. Thank you so much. We make a short break, and then we'll start at 2:30 with the other 2 residents. So see you around.